This is Masechah Sanhedrin daf 24a Aleph, and we're beginning with the word gufa. Gufa Amar Reish Lakish. Gufa means that we're going back to a previous statement of Reish Lakish to analyze it, but in a different way than we did last time. And Reish Lakish said, "Per kadosh yomar davar zeh tani edo." Reish Lakish said, could it be that the holy mouth of Rav Meir could say this thing, and it's referring to back in the Mishnah, where Rav Meir said that zeh posel edo shel zeh, that a litigant could disqualify witnesses. How can the holy mouth of Rav Meir say something so inconceivable that a litigant could unilaterally disqualify a witness? And Reish Lakish reinterpreted Rav Meir to be saying edo, that it means specifically in the case when there's one witness where the testimony is weaker in the absence of a second witness, and there's more flexibility or opportunity for a litigant to have a say in disqualifying the witness. The Gemara previously further analyzed this to say exactly what this means, but here the Gemara is returning to the statement of Reish Lakish to focus not on the content of what he said, but on his way of speaking. This isn't really true that Reish Lakish was so deferential to Rav Meir. V'ha'amar Ula, didn't Ula say, Haroa es Reish Lakish b'beis HaMedrash, that anyone who would see Reish Lakish in the Beis Medrash, ki'ilu oker harim, it was like he was uprooting mountains, v'tochanan zeh bazeh, and ground the mountains one into the other, because he was so analytical and sharp and deep that he analyzed a great detail. So could it be that he was so deferential to Rav Meir? Amar Ravina v'alo kol haroa Rav Meir b'beis HaMedrash ki'ilu oker hare harim v'tochanan zeh bazeh. What's the problem? Rav Meir was the same way. Rav Meir's predecessor was even more so in his sharp analysis, and therefore even Reish Lakish could speak this deferentially about Rav Meir. Hachi ka'amar. So this is what Reish Lakish meant, or what this is what the Gemara was trying to say about Reish Lakish. Bo re'ei kama mechavim zeh et zeh. Let's look at how dear the Tanaim and Amoraim were to each other, that they spoke with such love and deference and respect and humility. And another story that illustrates the same thing. Kihadu Yosef Rebbe was sitting and teaching. V'ka'amar, and he taught, Asur lahat minas atzonin. It's forbidden to insulate cold food. That it was very common to insulate their food, either hot or cold. They'd put it into a pot and put it onto the ground for the hot to stay hot and the cold to stay cold. So there is a halacha that there's a prohibition against insulating hot food on Shabbos because of the fact that it's similar to cooking it in certain cases. And Rebbe taught that not only can't you insulate hot food, you can't insulate cold food either, because it can be mixed up with hot food. Amar Lefana Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, said before Rebbe, Abba hitir lahat min atzonin. My father Rabbi Yossi allowed one to insulate cold food. He wasn't concerned with mixing up the hot and the cold, and he allowed the insulating of cold food on Shabbos. Amar Le, Rebbe responded, Kvar hora zakein. The elder has already taught. In other words, if that's the case that your father Rabbi Yossi allowed it, I withdraw my teaching, and I allow it now that I hear Rabbi Yossi's teaching. Just like that, just after hearing Rabbi Yossi's teaching, Rebbe immediately retracted out of respect to Rabbi Yossi. And Amar of Papa, Bo re'ei kama mechavim zeh et zeh. Look how much they were respecting each other. De'ilu Rabbi Yossi kayam, because if Rabbi Yossi was still alive, Hayakafa fi Yoshev lifnei Rebbe. Rabbi Yossi, when he was alive, would subordinate himself to Rebbe, because Rebbe was a Nasi. Rebbe was a Nasi. Da Rabbi Shmuel b'Rebbe Yossi memalei makom avosav hava. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, took the place of Rabbi Yossi, had the same stature. Hayakafa fi Yoshev lifnei Rebbe. He also subordinated himself in front of Rebbe. Rabbi Yossi and his son Rabbi Yishmael were both respectful and subordinated themselves before Rebbe. And nevertheless, Rebbe would say, Kfar Hora Zaken. He heard Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yossi's teaching, and he immediately withdrew. Even from these people who subordinated themselves to him, he subordinated himself to them. So we see how much the Tanoim and Amoraim, even though they debated with each other, were still respectful and deferential and humble before each other. On this theme, Amar Rabbi Oshia, what's the meaning of the pasuk in Zechariah? Va'ekach li shnei makalos. I will take two staffs. La'echad karasi noam, u'la'echad karasi chovlim. To one staff I call graciousness, and to one I call chovlim, hitters or attackers. And this is based on this pasuk in Zechariah, which is mentioned on the side of the Gemara. What is the meaning of these two staffs in the prophecy of Zechariah? Says Rabbi Oshia, Elu Talmidei Chachamim Eretz Yisrael. This refers to the scholars, the Talmidei Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael. Sheman'imim zeh lazeh b'halacha. They were gracious to each other when it comes to matters of halacha. Chovlim, what's a staff? That's a chovel. That's a hitter, a salter. Elu Talmidei Chachamim shebeBavel. These are the Talmidei Chachamim who lived in Bavel. Shemechavlim zeh lazeh b'halacha. They would attack each other, assault each other in their study of halacha. So here the Midrash furthers the theme of the respect to one another, but contrasts the scholars of Eretz Yisrael with the ones of Bavel. Vayomer eile shnei bnei hayitzar ha'omdim v'gomer. And we have another pasuk in Zechariah, which we're going to interpret in Parak Daled, the two sons of Yitzar of oil, ha'omdim al aron adon kol haaretz, and the pasuk says on Shnayim Zeisim Aleha, and two olive trees next to it. Echad mimin hagula ve'echad al smola, in Zechariah Parak Daled as well. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Elu Talmidei Chachamim she'eretz Yisrael shenochim zeh lazeh b'halacha. These two olives, these two bnei Yitzar, sons of olives, is a reference to the Talmidei Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael, who were soothing to one another in their study of halacha, keshem and zayis, like olive oil. Ushnayim zeisim aleha, and the two olive trees next to them. Elu Talmidei Chachamim shebeBavel. This refers to the scholars of Bavel, shem merorim zeh lazeh b'halacha, who were bitter to each other in their study of halacha, kezayis, like an olive tree. So here the Gemara seems to contrast the Talmidei Chachamim of Eretz Yisrael and the Talmidei Chachamim of Bavel, in that in Eretz Yisrael they were sweet, kind, gracious to one another, whereas in Bavel they were rough and assaulting to one another. And it's just interesting to see the BEn Yehoyaha, who explains this Gemara not how you might interpret it at the beginning. And he says that the style in Eretz Yisrael was, if one person would say halacha in the Beis Medrash, no one would ask questions. On the contrary, they would try to support each other, bring proofs, and resolve problems with each other's teachings, to explain each other. Like Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, who studied with Reish Lakish. Al kol halacha v'shmaita sheyamotzi Rabbi Yochanan mipiv. Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas took the place of Reish Lakish after Reish Lakish passed away and studied with Rabbi Yochanan. And every time that he would hear a teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, he would bring proofs to support this teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. And because of this, says the BEn Yehoyaha, the teaching, the studying together didn't really bring forth Chidushay Torah, because their studying just brought more support to the same teachings that they had in the beginning. But in Bavel, they would attack each other, and that would actually sharpen each other. Like Reish Lakish, the predecessor of Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, Rabbi Yochanan mourned the loss of Reish Lakish because Reish Lakish would bring a lot of attacks to the teaching, and that would cause Rabbi Yochanan to resolve the problems and to support his teaching in a much stronger way. So the questions brought forth new halachos. That was the style in Bavel. And that's why they were called chovlim. They would assault each other with questions, not in a disrespectful way, but in a way that brought forth better learning. And chovlim is linked to the word cholvim, that they would, like milk, their learning would bring forth fruits and better teachings. And that was the actual praise. This Gemara actually praises Bavel and their style of learning over Eretz Yisrael in their styles. But nevertheless, the Gemara presents these two styles that existed in the learning that the Chachamim of Eretz Yisrael and Bavel had with one another.